webinars are made possible thanks to generous donor support. If you'd like to contribute, please visit our website, autism.org.
Now, before we get started, I'll introduce our speaker. Vicki Kobliner is a registered dietitian nutritionist with more than 20 years of expertise applying a functional nutritional approach to the care of children and adults. She utilizes her wealth of experience with both traditional and integrative modalities, incorporating the power of food, herbs, and targeted nutrition support for both prevention of and healing from both acute and chronic illnesses. Vicki sees pediatric patients and their families and has extensive experience in addressing a wide variety of childhood illnesses. And now I will turn it over to Vicki.
Thanks, Denise. I'm excited to be here. I know I spoke last month and maybe some of you heard me then and are back again to learn some more. And I'm excited to share some of my knowledge with you about the role of nutrition, herbs, and lifestyle for sleep. So I will jump right in. We are obviously going to be focusing a lot of this today on how sleep affects children and children's needs. But at the same time, when our children don't sleep, we don't sleep. And when we don't sleep, it affects our ability to be our best selves as well and to be healthy for them. So it is important to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves and as well as taking care of our children. And the other issue is that sometimes we are the ones who have some of the habits that are most impair sleep. And one of the ones we'll be talking about is, use of electronics before bed, for example, which is something that often we are doing as parents more than they are, because once they go to bed, we're Googling and trying to find answers to questions. But the more we can support our own sleep, the better off we're going to be in that regard as well. So how sleep affects children. There is well-documented evidence that when children don't sleep, and again, adults as well, they are more likely to be impulsive, have poor impulse control. We see sleep deficit being identified as attention deficit disorder and kids getting diagnosed with ADHD, even when they really don't have ADHD and they just need more sleep. Forgetfulness is common. Other learning deficits are also an issue for children who are not sleeping adequately. Obesity, and this is again true for adults and kids. When we do not sleep well, we have increased inflammation in our body, and our dysregulation of our hormones directly impacts weight management. So many people don't understand why they can't lose weight, for example. It may very well be because of your sleep habits. In addition, we see impaired immune function, and this is a really big deal for our kids who already may have upregulated or dysregulated immune system issues. And this is going to further affect how their immune system resets itself, because much of our immune system resets itself at night. We also see anxiety and depression and other mood disorders being much more prevalent in those who have sleep dysfunction and sleep disruption. So what we want to think about is, okay, what does that mean for us? What is inadequate sleep? And one of the things that's important to note here when we say how much sleep do we need is that sleep does not just require us to, get into bed. There is a process of sleep that I'm actually not going to talk a lot about here, but it's essentially when we go to sleep, how long does it take us to fall asleep? How long do we remain asleep? Do we wake in the middle of the night? Do we wake multiple times in the middle of the night? How early do we rise? And also, what is the quality of the sleep we have? So we may feel like we're sleeping reasonably well, but at the same time, we're never getting into REM sleep. We're never getting into some of the other stages of sleep that are important for resetting and supporting our immune and our physiologic health. So when we're thinking about what's normal sleep pattern, yes, there are ranges, but for a toddler, we're talking about somewhere between 11 and 14 hours. For preschool children, it's 10 to 13, and for school age, 9 to 11. So many of the kids I work with are going to bed at 10 or 11 o'clock at night and waking up at 7. They're not getting the amount of sleep that they need and they're in a serious deficit. When kids are up in the middle of the night or when they're unable to fall asleep, they're put to bed at 9 o'clock, but they don't actually go down until 11, and we can hear them in their rooms talking, playing, crying, whatever it may be. They are not getting that important and restorative sleep that they need. And as adults, I just, again, want to point this out because we also have to take care of ourselves. Adults need 7 to 9 hours. So those of us who are existing on 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night are at a deficit that may affect our health as well. I'm just going to move this over here. So the thing that's important about sleep is what's known as a circadian rhythm. That is a biological rhythm that changes over 24 hours. And it's every one of our bodies goes through that. It influences, and I see a typo there, sorry, but the circadian rhythm influences the production of cortisol, which is a hormone that it directly affects sleep, and melatonin. So cortisol and melatonin do a bit of a dance. When cortisol is high, we are awake. So in the morning, our cortisol levels go up to wake us up, give us energy, get us ready for our day. At night, the cortisol should go down, the melatonin should increase, and the melatonin is what helps us to fall asleep. So our melatonin should be low in the morning as the cortisol rises, so they kind of work conversely to each other. We know that when children have a healthy circadian rhythm, a healthy sleep pattern with normal regulation of cortisol and melatonin, their physiological and their mental health, as well as their development, cognitive, neurological, and behavioral processes are enhanced. And when they're having poor sleep patterns, all of these things can be affected. So this is what a healthy cortisol and melatonin pattern looks like. So cortisol is the blue, melatonin is the red. And so what you see is early in the morning, 7, 8 o'clock, when you're waking, depending on when you're waking, you're going to be theoretically full of cortisol with not that much melatonin. And as the day progresses, we'll see the melatonin here is low, the cortisol is nice and high. It's waking us up, giving us energy. As the day progresses, we start to get more and more tired. Our melatonin rises, our bodies have more melatonin, we have much less cortisol, we are able to sleep well. So anything that disrupts the cortisol melatonin pattern is something that's going to affect our sleep. So there's a number of things we can do from a lifestyle perspective that will improve or support normal sleep patterns. One of those is sleep temperature. And when you decrease your core temperature, it helps you fall asleep. So very often it's a good idea to turn the heat down at night, make sure the house becomes a little cooler. Wearing socks or putting a hot water bottle on your feet actually helps to bring more blood flow from your core to your extremities. When you do that, you actually radiate heat out, you lose some heat. And what that does is then cools down our body temperature a little bit. The other thing you can do is take a hot shower, sauna, warm bath, 60 to 90 minutes before bedtime. Again, what that's going to do, it seems counterintuitive, you would get warmer, but what it actually does is it brings the blood to the surface, and then you start to lose some of the heat from your skin. And so you'll end up with a cooler, slightly cooler core temperature, which will help you to fall asleep. The other thing that's really, really important is relaxation. And that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But remember, cortisol should be at its lowest when you're entering bedtime. Anything that increases cortisol is going to interfere with sleep. One of the things that we know interferes cortisol the most is anxiety and stress. So anything that we can do to reduce anxiety, to increase relaxation, to support our body's ascendancy into that calmer state is going to be really helpful. And all the things I'm going to talk about as we go forward with the discussion today are things that are going to reduce anxiety. You'll often see anxiety listed as one of the things that different herbs or supplements might do, reduce anxiety. And that's because we know that when anxiety is elevated, cortisol is elevated, and that disrupts sleep. So that relationship is very, very tight and very connected. So how do we wind down? One of the best things we can do is avoid electronics 1 to 2 hours before bedtime. And that means anything, TV, video games, sitting on our phones, all of those types of things. So if we can schedule time with our kids where they're not getting exposure to electronics 1 to 2 hours before bedtime, it is going to be easier for them to relax. And we're going to talk a little bit about that more when it comes to electronics specifically. But relaxing body movements are great too. Some people do yoga before bed. Sometimes we do some gentle stretching. Sometimes it's just a walk, after dinner, anything like that that can bring down the level of stress is going to be helpful. There's a lot of really good data about meditation, and meditation can be done a variety of ways. And there is a little bit of a paradox here, and a little bit of a, I can't even remember the word, but essentially one of the things that people often do to help them relax is some sort of meditation app. And meditation apps have been shown to be very helpful. But what that then means is that you're using your electronics before bed, which we're trying to avoid. So often if somebody's going to use a meditation app, what I recommend is, you may go in for your child, turn it on, and then have it somewhere where they can hear the meditation, or they can listen to the sounds, because very often people use sounds for meditation. But the blue light, the light is one of the things that's the most problematic. So if the light is not near them, then it's better, and it's not going to keep them awake, but they can listen to the meditative music or the meditative words or sounds, and that can help them to get into that relaxed state. For older children, writing and journaling is a really great tool, especially for kids who have a lot of worries. It can be very, very helpful to write down those worries, put them in a book, and then say, once they're in the book, they're done. Gratitude journals are also really, really helpful. There's a lot of really good data that shows that gratitude journals, writing down 3 things that you're grateful for, even more if you can come up with them, but routine, scheduled use and scheduled gratitude thinking and writing can both reduce anxiety, but also in certain studies, they show that it decreases the time it takes to fall asleep by 50%. That's pretty extraordinary. So any and all of these things are helpful. Each one, if it incrementally decreases the time to fall asleep or impacts a child's ability to sleep more deeply for longer, is going to be beneficial. Now, when it comes to lighting, it's really important to avoid LED lights and to start dimming the lights before bed. So again, you may decide that in your child's room, there's going to be a gentle night light after 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. You're not going to have, high-powered lights, high wattage in the bedroom at that time. You can use different colored lights that actually have lower impacts. The truth is, for truly, truly good sleep, there should be virtually no light at all. We're not used to that. We're used to a society, we've lived like this for, centuries, but we're used to a society where there's always a light outside, there's from something. But in truth, we used to not have electricity, we didn't have lights, and you sleep best when there is zero light, when it is completely black. So blackout curtains may be beneficial, wearing a sleep mask may be beneficial. For sure, if somebody continues to use electronics, it's very important to do something like the blue blocker glasses, the ones that will get rid of that blue light, which is the one that actually reduces your melatonin and increases your cortisol more in the evening. Phones and electronics have night shift or different types of apps you can use to eliminate the blue light. Again, what that implies is that you're using your computer before bed. The goal is not to use the phone or the computer before bed, so you wouldn't have to deal with this. But if you're not at that point yet, and a child or yourself are still using your electronics before bed, then you want to get rid of the blue light, because that's going to shut off the melatonin production, and that's going to be problematic. The things that support sleep physiologically are avoiding food. Again, when you're digesting, you're upregulating your awakeness, and so you want to avoid food 3 hours before bed. You want, again, to avoid that rise in core temperature. You want to avoid simple carbs because they'll upregulate your blood sugar, and that's going to also negatively impact your sleep. And because of circadian rhythms, the other issue is many of us kind of burn the candle at both ends during the week, and then we're allowed to sleep in during the weekend. But when you actually have a much more consistent bedtime, when you put yourself to sleep, you or your child, when you have a routine bedtime and wake time, over time, your body will adapt to that. So setting a scheduled sleep and wake time can be very helpful for sleep training. And that's important too. So let's talk about exercise a little bit. We've got 2 different things going on here. Exercise is really good for sleep. Early in the day, exercise is really, really good for reducing stress, for changing your physiology, for reducing cortisol. However, if you do that exercise, raising cortisol, if you do that exercise too close to bedtime, you're going to increase your core temperature, which we don't want, and you're going to raise your cortisol levels. So we really want this to happen at least 2 to 3 hours before bed. So make sure any kind of activity you're doing is gentle, and try to get that exercise in earlier in the day. The other thing I want to talk about and make a point of is sleep obstruction. So if your child looks like this when they're sleeping, they may very well be congested. They may have sleep apnea. If they're snoring, what's happening to them is they are most likely suffering from a lack of oxygen. That oxygen is going to affect their sleep, absolutely, without doubt. And what that's going to result in is more daytime fatigue and the signs and symptoms of attention deficit. So if you see your child mouth breathing like this or sleeping with their mouth open, you do want to get them checked. You want to get them checked for if they have chronic congestion. And if so, you want to do something about that. There's many things we can talk about that you can do for congestion that are natural, but you also want to rule out any kind of apnea if that may be an issue. And for kids who are overweight, you can have apnea even if you're not overweight, but if you are overweight, there's a greater likelihood of apnea. So let's talk a little bit about nutrition and how that, we've talked about lifestyle, so now we're going to talk about nutrition and how that impacts sleep. We know that nutrition directly impacts sleep. They are correlated, they go hand in hand, both in terms of nutrients that you get too much of and that you get too little of, and what's important for both modulating cortisol and also supporting other functions like blood sugar. So NHANES is a study that's done with a huge population in the United States. We do this routinely, and it is there to check kind of overall health markers in the American population. We have seen repeatedly that lack of key nutrients such as calcium, magnesium, and certain vitamins are associated with sleep problems. The ones I focus on most are calcium, magnesium, vitamin D, very, very much involved in sleep. We know that when those are deficient, you'll have dysfunction in our hormonal pathways that regulate sleep. We also know that amino acids, B vitamins, and macronutrient balance, and by that I mean the ratio of carbohydrates, fat, and protein, is also involved. So again, the protein is important because it provides the amino acids that you're going to see are really critical for sleep. We also want to look at the quality of the carbohydrates we eat. So it's interesting. People often say, oh, I heard that you should drink more milk before bed, or you should have, some bread before bed because that helps you go to sleep. Well, number one, many of our children are not consuming dairy. They're not consuming gluten. Carbohydrates are really mixed. There's mixed data about them, which we're going to talk about a little more. Some can be helpful for sleep, others not so much. Calcium, as I said, vitamin D, magnesium, really important. And then specific amino acids. Some of the key amino acids are tryptophan, GABA, 5-HTP, and L-theanine, as well as B6 and B12, which are vitamins that support these amino acid processes. So let's talk a little bit about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates support melatonin production. So that's a good thing, a really good thing. However, as we talked about, you don't want to be eating too close to bedtime because that's going to disrupt your blood sugar regulation and that's going to interfere with sleep. So best to consume carbs 3 to 4 hours before bed. I often tell clients that if they're limiting carbs in their children's diet and they're having sleep problems, you kind of want to backload your carbs so that if you have to parse them out throughout the day, you do more at dinner time, less in the morning, because that's going to help support good sleep with it. But you want to make sure that you have at least that 2 hours before bed. When you use processed carbs, when you're using sugars, you're using, white flour grains or other grains that don't have a lot of fiber in them, you're going to increase your glycemic load. That has actually been shown to increase the time to get to sleep. So we don't want white flour types, white carbs before bed. We want it 2 hours before at a minimum. We want it to be whole grains, high fiber, and that's the type of carb that would be ideal at that dinner time. We know that carbohydrates can increase drowsiness, but there's also studies show that they increase night waking. So not ideal. The goal is some carbs, whole grain, 2 hours before bed can be helpful. One of the other things we know about diets in general is that Mediterranean type diets have been shown over and over and over again to benefit sleep. And a Mediterranean diet is one that is predominantly plant foods, vegetables, nuts, legumes, fruits, as well as really healthy oils like olive oil. A Mediterranean diet predominantly relies on olive oil, but things like avocado are great as well. Nut and seed oils can be great as well. But Mediterranean diets do include omega-3s. They include lots of fiber, lots of antioxidant vegetables and fruits, limited amounts of other animal proteins, and limited amounts of carbs. So Mediterranean type diets are actually one of the diets that's been proved to be the most helpful for almost every issue that people suffer with, but they have also been shown to help with sleep. So calcium and vitamin D, super important because they convert tryptophan to melatonin. We're going to talk a little bit more about tryptophan and melatonin in a second, but that's the most, that's one of the best things we can do there. We want to get some calcium in. We want to give high calcium foods. Does not have to be dairy based. There's lots of others. So again, you can see with a dairy-free diet, we may not be drinking milk, but almonds, broccoli, sesame seeds, blackstrap molasses are all great things you can have close to bedtime to help support sleep. And vitamin D and calcium go hand in hand. Low vitamin D is linked to insomnia, but taken at night, it can reduce melatonin. So the best thing to do is supplement vitamin D early in the day, but make sure you're getting it because that's also going to help with your calcium needs. The ways we get vitamin D, sunlight is predominant. So if you have access to sunlight, if you live in a more southern climate in the summer, that's great. You may need to supplement vitamin D, and we think most people do in the winter. But egg yolks and fatty fish are two of your other really good sources. Magnesium also goes hand in hand with calcium and vitamin D. They all work together to support calcium levels and bring them into the bones. But in addition, they have many, many other roles, including sleep. Magnesium is particularly good for relaxation. Low levels of magnesium are correlated over and over again with poor sleep quality and insomnia. Now, remember, the other thing that's really important here is that magnesium is linked to relaxation and calming. So again, when we're talking about that anxiety, getting enough magnesium in is really important. It supports the calming neurotransmitters. It helps relax. Magnesium sulfate as Epsom salt bath is a fabulous thing to do before bed because that can really get you into that relaxed state. Having adequate magnesium makes it easier to fall asleep as well as improve sleep quality. So you not only get to sleep better earlier, but you also sleep more deeply and your sleep quality is improved. We get magnesium from things like leafy greens, nuts, seeds, whole grains, and soy. Remember, not all of us are eating all whole grains, not all of us are eating soy, but leafy greens, nuts, seeds, all part of a Mediterranean diet, great ways to get it and you can also obviously use a supplement as needed. If your child is constipated, that is also a sign that they have a magnesium deficit. So if you have a child who's constipated and doesn't sleep, you really want to put magnesium as one of your top priorities for support. B vitamins are also really important. B6 and B12 particularly, both are linked to insomnia. B6 also linked to depression, as is B12, and they regulate the sleep-wake cycle. You need these for melatonin production. So if you don't have enough B vitamins, you really want to support that. But it's important to know to not supplement willy-nilly. Basically, high doses are not safe. You don't want to overdo it. B vitamins can be activating to some kids and some adults as well. So you want to be careful. I usually start with very low doses of these things to see if they're needed. And if a child gets activated, I am not going to use that for sleep. But for some children, it actually helps them to sleep. And you can see some of the food sources here are ones that are actually also consistent with some vitamin D, some calcium, some magnesium. So again, a Mediterranean type diet has a lot of these nutrients in it and can be very helpful. So let's look at amino acids for a second. Amino acids are the breakdown products or the building blocks, either way you look at it. They are what make up proteins. And when we digest them, the proteins break down into amino acids. And proteins, these amino acids, there's certain ones that are incredibly important for helping us sleep. So for example, tryptophan is an amino acid that turns into 5-hydroxytryptophan. 5-HTP, many of you have probably heard of 5-HTP. It can be very, a great mood modulator. Now, 5-HTP turns into serotonin, which we know is one of the most important neurotransmitters for mood, but serotonin ultimately turns into melatonin. So when you don't have enough serotonin or when you don't eat enough tryptophan, you are not going to be able to make adequate melatonin. So it's tryptophan to serotonin to melatonin is that pathway. And you want to be able to support that pathway with the food that you eat and with adequate protein. This is a list of some of the foods that you find with abundant tryptophan. And again, eggs, nuts, pumpkin and sesame seed, tofu and soy, salmon, all of these things. Again, if we look at a Mediterranean type diet, They are all very prevalent in that type of a diet. And these are all generally healthy foods, unless your child has a specific intolerance to this food, then you would obviously avoid it. But that's what we want to do. So, sorry, let me go back. Whoop. There we go. So getting tryptophan to melatonin is key. That's one of our priorities. And getting tryptophan to melatonin actually utilizes a heck of a lot of nutrients that I didn't even write down here, but it includes magnesium and zinc and B6 and vitamin D and a lot of the ones that I just mentioned. So you require these nutritional cofactors to make this process work. So a good healthy diet is all the more important. Two other amino acids that are particularly helpful are GABA and theanine. GABA is our main inhibitory neurotransmitter. Glutamine turns to glutamate. That is an excitatory neurotransmitter. Now, many of us have this perception that glutamine is bad, but it's not. Our body needs it. It gets us upregulated. But we're supposed to be like a seesaw. We're supposed to be able to go up and then come down and go up and come down. And it's glutamine and GABA and back and forth and back and forth. Sometimes we end up too high here. We can't make enough GABA. We can't transform into GABA well enough. And so we don't get to calm down. You really want to support your GABA. It favors sleep when you have adequate GABA. L-theanine is an anti-anxiety amino acid that increases relaxation. And the studies show that when you take GABA and L-theanine together, you actually have better outcomes than you do with either one alone. So you can decrease your time to sleep. You can improve your sleep quality better with a combination than with either one alone. Now, there are also a number of herbs and supplements that I like to utilize for sleep. We'll go through this list. Obviously, one of the first ones is melatonin. Using melatonin directly is a great way to compensate for a lack of melatonin if your body isn't producing it for any one of a number of reasons, or if you're cycling it too fast and you're just using it up too quickly. You want to give melatonin about 2 hours before bedtime. It can work up to a half an hour before bedtime, but 2 hours before is actually good. 1 to 3 milligrams is usually the recommended dose to start. In kids, I don't tend to do lots more than that, but some kids do need more. It does appear to be safe for the long term, but I don't like to use anything without double checking periodically. So I wouldn't use it for years and years without kind of rechecking and reviewing your supplement profile. You do have to be careful with other meds and supplements that cause drowsiness. And some of the other good things about melatonin is a really good antioxidant. So sometimes it gets used up if there's an upregulation of inflammation in the body and your oxidative stress is too high. You may use up more melatonin and you need more to help support that. It can also help with reflux. If you've got a child who has reflux and also has trouble sleeping, then melatonin could be a really good option here. Now, one of the things though about melatonin is it helps you to fall asleep because we've got that rhythm. It does not keep you asleep because, as you remember, with those cycles, the melatonin starts to decrease in the middle of the night so that cortisol can start to increase to help wake you up in the morning. So melatonin is not something that generally keeps you asleep for very long. There are other herbs that you may want to do in combination with melatonin. There are extended release melatonins, and sometimes I do use those, but for the most part, I don't like using them as much or giving melatonin, at 3 in the morning if somebody wakes up, because what that's going to do is change your cortisol melatonin pattern, and that's not ideal for the long run. But valerian, for example, is a wonderful herb that can help you maintain your sleep. It not only helps reduce the time to sleep, but it keeps you sleeping. So that's a really nice one if you need melatonin or, to get to sleep, but then you need something for sleep maintenance. Valerian is something to consider. And it acts on those GABA receptors. So it's really nice to use for calming. It does increase the sedative effect of medication. So you want to be careful with that. Some people use valerian as a relaxant throughout the day, not just at night, but just be careful if there are other meds that can make your child drowsy because it can have an additive effect. Another really soothing herb is lemon balm, which works very well when you combine it with valerian. It's another one that'll keep you sleeping. It's another one that is very good for relaxation, helpful for anxiety. There's actually a number of good studies in children. So it's a nice, safe herb to use. You can use it as a tea, you can use it as a tincture, as a supplement. Teas and tinctures are often better absorbed. So kids often respond better to those, but you'll just want to make sure, again, any of these can work. Be mindful of child dosing. I did talk about dosing for melatonin more because I don't want people to overdose, but you do need to be careful because generally you want to use a dose that's appropriate for children. And I'm not mostly discussing doses here today. Another one that I really like is jujube. Now we remember the candies probably, but jujube is actually a plant. It's called ziziphus. And we know that it can increase sleep time. So, and I just want to clarify, that doesn't mean time to sleep, it means the duration of how long you sleep. And it could also increase your sleep quality, and it is a good potent anti-anxiety herb. So I like using ziziphus. It is not as well known or as commonly used as I haven't seen parents use it as much, but when I use it, I actually find it to be very helpful. So I've started to use it more myself with my clients, not personally. Passion flower, another one, which I also think is just incredibly beautiful, but passion flower also increases total sleep time, also includes sleep efficiency, which is the percentage of time you're spent sleeping as opposed to when you're lying in bed awake. So parents often find passion flower helpful for themselves as well because they're lying in bed worrying about things, and it can help you to fall asleep. And then also improves wake time. Some of the best ways to do this also are teas and extracts, but you can also do supplements as needed. Chamomile is another wonderful one, which is super helpful. I mean, so many people are used to drinking chamomile tea, and chamomile tea before bed is wonderful for anxiety, wonderful for sleep quality, not quite as good for insomnia. So it's not going to help get you to sleep quite the same way, but once you are asleep, it's going to help improve your sleep quality. So I love chamomile, and it's super safe, super easy to take. You can take it as a tea, you can take it as a supplement. It's a great option. Skullcap, there's Chinese skullcap, there's American skullcap. Both of them are helpful for sleep. They are different and they are used differently, but when it comes to sleep, they both can have efficacy. And there's not as much research about its function, but in traditional use, it's been used quite a bit in traditional medicine practices for, millennia. So I also have found it to be helpful. I do recommend it, but there isn't as much research evidence to support it. One of the other ones, though, that I really love is lavender. And many of you have probably heard that lavender is helpful for sleep. The truth is, lavender can be great as it improves sleep quality. You can take it as an essential oil. You can just have it in the room. When my son was little and he was a really rough sleeper, I actually had a spray bottle. And I used to go into both my kids, actually, but specifically for him, of lavender essential oil. And I would tell him it was magic sleep spray. And I would spray it in each of the kids' rooms, and it really did help. But lavender can improve sleep quality. It's been documented over and over again. The research is very strong. It makes the sleep more restful. It helps to increase the duration of sleep. However, long-term use has been linked to breast growth in the males. So again, as a spray or an essential oil, it's different than when you're ingesting it. I would be a little bit more careful when using it in males. Now, there is a particular type of lavender called silexin. And this has been studied over and over again and well documented to reduce anxiety-related sleep disruption. So silexin can be used for anxiety specifically, but it does have an excellent effect on sleep. You just have to be careful because it is a lavender derivative. And I don't generally recommend brands, but the Integrative Therapeutics Labella is excellent. The other types of herbs that are really helpful are adaptogens. Now, they do not work in the same way as some of these other herbs we talked about. They don't directly work on sleep, but what they do is they help the body to be more resilient. So again, the definition of an adaptogen is that it's a compound which can intervene in a stress reaction and alter it. What that then does is it helps to deal with emotional and physical stress. And this has a positive effect on our ability to sleep well. So again, if we think about the whole seesaw, our bodies are designed to increase our stress response when appropriate, but then they are supposed to be able to then bring it down. Many of the medications that we use only work unidirectionally, only in one direction. So if it's an anti-anxiety medication, it's going to reduce your stress, but it's actually going to interfere with your ability to mount an appropriate stress response when necessary. With these adaptogenic herbs, they work to actually improve your body's stress resilience, to be able to mount a response when needed, but then also to be able to bring it down when it's no longer needed. And so adaptogenic herbs are great for supporting adrenal stress response, and anything that supports that adrenal stress response is going to help with cortisol, because remember, cortisol not only helps us with sleep, but it's what we produce in response to stress. So rhodiola is one of my favorites. Can reduce fatigue, also really good during the day for attention and focus, which is one of the reasons we like it. Also seems to help with mitochondria, so it's a really nice one. And you know, I like to start with something like that. Again, if the symptoms are right. So if we have a kid who's having trouble with attention and focus, if we know that there are mitochondrial issues and they are also tired, rhodiola might be a great adaptogen to use then. Then we have ashwagandha, which is one of the most well-known adaptogenic herbs. The active compound is called a withanolide, and ashwagandha is number one, very good for stress, also really, really good for supporting thyroid function, increases mental alertness, and improves sleep quality. Holy basil is another, also known as tulsi, very calming, anti-stress, anti-anxiety, helps lower cortisol. So again, this is a better one to take at night. You don't want to take this in the morning because it's going to suppress your cortisol. And it supports blood sugar regulation, which again, increased blood sugar is not good for stress response. So in summary, good sleep requires proper regulation of cortisol, melatonin, and those circadian rhythms. Anxiety, depression, and blood sugar regulation can all impact sleep negatively. Poor blood sugar regulation. So when we have poor sleep, it's going to impact our daily function, our energy, our attention, our blood sugar. So that's a cycle. Poor blood sugar regulation impacts sleep. Poor sleep impacts blood sugar regulation. And also, poor sleep impacts our hormone balance. So there are things we can do, changing our habits, changing our diet, utilizing herbs and supplements, which can reduce stress and modulate that cortisol, which can enhance all the parts of sleep. The ability to fall asleep, the length of sleep, the quality of sleep. So one of the things we want to do is try to identify that low-hanging fruit and start there. Is it electronics? Are we doing too much of that? Can we change, swap out sugary bedtime snacks? Is your child or yourself not getting enough protein? Do they need more protein so they get that tryptophan, GABA, theanine, etc.? And what about stress? How do we modulate stress? Do we do more physical activity? Do we do more meditation? Anything that can change the equation here is going to be really helpful in getting a child to sleep. So that sums up my recommendations and my sleep education. What I'm going to do now is go to the questions. We've got about 15 more minutes. So I will start to read them. I see we have about 26. I don't know if I'll get to them all, but I'm going to go through them kind of quickly and see if there's any that kind of repeat each other. So somebody asked, is it true that lack of sleep due to anxiety? It is true. It is also the other way around. Stress can affect sleep. This goes into a vicious cycle, 100%. That's where things like adaptogens, magnesium, any of those herbs and nutritional supplements can really help to reduce the anxiety and stress. So therefore, we can sleep better. When we sleep better, we have less stress. The other thing is, remember, those electronics are stress inducers. So the more we can get rid of some of those electronics, the better off we're going to be. What strategies can I recommend to get to sleep early after a bad day at school? Kid does not sleep until 1 a.m. Worried about the next day, late attendance? Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things. Number one, again, we're going to cycle back to adaptogenic herbs, which can be really helpful for that stress response. But the other thing is here, something like cognitive behavioral therapy, because this isn't just about a physiological response to stress. This is an emotional response, and this is adaptation, emotional adaptation and resilience. So doing some sort of cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, something like that can be really helpful. But there are other things, believe it or not. I didn't really talk about these as much, but hypnotherapy, there is sleep hypnotherapy, which works in some people very, very well. And it can change that sleep pattern when they're not able to change it themselves. But all the things that are upregulating them. So even though they're worried at night, maybe doing that worry journal will help. Getting things really dark is also going to physiologically make them more primed for sleep. And then giving them some of the herbs that are really good for addressing sleep onset are the things that are going to help most. So something like melatonin might be really key here, because it can often be hard to fight your melatonin. Once the melatonin is up, it's going to make you sleep. How much variation is there in the general population for how much sleep someone needs? There is variation. That's why you saw, like in certain cases, yes, if somebody needs 9 hours, there may be people who only need 7. That's why there were ranges in that sleep chart. But physiologically, even though people have convinced themselves that they only need 4 or 5 hours of sleep a day, the toll on their body physiologically is not good. There really are not many people who can live on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, even if that is what they're used to and they feel like they're functioning. You really do need to be in that window. How come my 3-year-old gets very energetic after bath and shower, can't wind down for much longer? Try to make sure try to shower her long before bedtime. So it may be what's happening. Again, not everybody responds to everything. I would try, if they're very energetic, I would try putting relaxing things in the bath, whether it's herbs. Some of the herbs we talked about, you can actually put in the bath. I would be doing magnesium sulfate, Epsom salt baths for sure. For this child, it may be they need their bath a few hours earlier, but they may need more change in the core temperature. It may be that the bath is not changing their core temperature well enough. But I would certainly do the bath earlier, but I would be starting to put in some of those relaxing interventions like magnesium sulfate with the bath. What can non-functional kids do to fall asleep and sleep better? I am not 100% sure. I understand what you mean. If you mean the ones who are not modulating their own sleep, again, some of the adaptogenic herbs can really be helpful. Getting them exercised when they come home from school so they have some physical activity, but not right before bed, changing the diet, giving them some melatonin or some of the other sleep herbs or supplements can help with that. My 18-year-old son, unmedicated, goes to the gym every night, 7 to 9. He gets better muscle build when he goes at night. Yeah. What can you do to decompress after the gym to help him get to sleep? I would really start to work on, maybe he takes a cold, for him, he might want to try the difference between a cold and a warm shower, see if one of them helps him get to sleep better. The other thing is I would really make sure for him, there's no electronics. I would make sure that he is doing blackout curtains and a sleep mask and wearing warm socks to bed, as well as, again, using, if he doesn't have stress, the adaptogenic herbs may not be the right thing for him, but some of the nutrients and melatonin may be the way to go in a case like that. But I agree, he's probably affecting his sleep. Do taking supplements at night affect sleep? Yes, some may. B vitamins right before bed can affect sleep. How many hours before sleep can we give the supplements? Usually, I tend to give anything that affects sleep, give it in the morning. So things like vitamin D, which is going to affect melatonin, I would not give at night generally. Things like the B vitamins, I give in the morning because they can be activating. So those are some of the key ones. So that kind of answers the same as the next question. Would you give vitamins and supplements in the morning or at night? Depends which ones they are and what their role is. If they're sleep promoters, you generally give them at night. If they're activators, you give them in the morning. What wears off in the body in 6 hours of night sleep? My child wakes up in exactly 6 hours after falling asleep, can't go back for 4 hours at night, no matter how she tries. I do everything. Melatonin seems to help. If I don't give it to her, she'll wake up. We eat clean, lots of fruit, vitamin supplements, fish oil. I think her wakefulness is hormonal because of ASD. Well, then what you want to be thinking about there is what have you looked at her hormones? Have you done any hormone testing to see if there are imbalances there? It sounds like she needs more of the herbs that are good for sleep maintenance. Things like valerian, which maintain sleep. Again, it may be that when you're giving her the melatonin, I don't quite see this completely in your question, helping her to sleep through the night. If I don't give it to her, she'll wake up. I'm not sure if that means you give her more melatonin in the middle of the night. I don't think that's what this means, but if so, I would be giving her some of the ones that are better for sleep duration and quality of sleep, because those are going to keep her asleep. Somebody else wrote here, my son experienced the same problem, needs GABA to keep her sleeping during the night. Melissa and valerian might also be helpful. Yeah, exactly. GABA can be great. Valerian can be great. So those are things you can try. Pediatrician told me to stop giving my 10-year-old magnesium because it causes diarrhea. Well, there's a lot of different forms of magnesium. Magnesium citrate can give you diarrhea. Magnesium glycinate, magnesium taurate, magnesium threonate don't give you diarrhea to the same extent. So you still get the benefit of the magnesium without the laxatives. And again, if your child, are they having diarrhea every day, or did the doctor just tell you that because he just saw that the child was taking magnesium? If your child is having a normal stool every day, I wouldn't worry about it. If they are struggling with loose stool, I would switch to a form of magnesium that is less of a laxative. However, it may also be that magnesium is not the thing that's helping your child. It may be that she needs or he needs some of the other things that we talked about, some of the adaptogens, some of the herbs, and some of the other nutrients like vitamin D and calcium. They may be more helpful. Foods that are gassy and need to be avoided at night. Cruciferous vegetables are often, and legumes are known to be the most gassy, but with good digestive health, they should not be waking you at night. So if the child is gassy and not tolerating these foods, you really want to be looking at their digestive health as well as any sleep support. Somebody asked if the slides could be emailed. We will answer that later. Yes, I don't know, but I know that they are generally posted, so there should be a way to access them, and Denise will contact you about that. My 16-year-old daughter generally doesn't sleep early in the night. She generally sleeps at 3 a.m., wakes up at 9 a.m. Suffering from autism. Also, please suggest her dietary pattern. So again, a Mediterranean type diet. And then if she's going to bed at 3 in the morning, you really have to start thinking about all of those sleep interventions. Pitch black bedroom, no electronics, relaxation techniques, and then also possibly using some of the herbs and the some of the nutrients and the adaptogens, as well as a Mediterranean type diet. Somebody else asked, can you please share more about restless leg syndrome? What symptoms indicate? Restless leg is something that responds very well to magnesium. What it basically is when you are asleep and your leg starts to move, kind of inadvertently. So that's why it's called restless leg syndrome, because what happens is the leg will start to pulse, kick at night when somebody's sleeping, and often that's a sign that there's a magnesium deficit. I've read that Epsom salt baths actually are not well absorbed, if at all, through the skin, so they actually help sleep. Yes, magnesium and sulfur too helps you detox. That's another thing that can help us sleep. But yes, you don't get tremendous absorption, but you do get some. And a warm bath with magnesium sulfate can be very relaxing before sleep. I would try it. If it doesn't help, you don't have to keep using it. But I have a lot of clients who respond very well to Epsom salt baths. For someone who follows a vegetarian diet, what would sources for B vitamins be? Legumes, leafy greens. Those are good sources as well. Is 50 milligrams of B6 okay to give before bed? I'm not going to answer that question because I don't really talk too much about dosing, and I don't know what else your child is taking. So I'm going to leave that one for, that's not what I'm going to answer. How many hours before sleep is it ideal to take GABA L-theanine? An hour before is fine. If you take it too early, it's going to make you drowsy, and you don't want that too early. So I usually recommend somewhere around an hour, half an hour before bed is fine. Does using cortisol, melatonin, and L-theanine together affect sleep? You would never want to use cortisol and melatonin together. Cortisol is going to raise, that's what wakes you. Melatonin puts you to sleep, theanine puts you to sleep. So you should never be using cortisol with melatonin and L-theanine. And cortisol is not something people generally supplement. Generally, what we're trying to do is modulate cortisol. So I'm a little confused about the question, but melatonin and L-theanine can be used together. That's not a problem at all. With who do we check melatonin for long-term use? 3.5-year-old child, regular pediatrician, doesn't know anything. Can I give valerian to such a tiny child? We can use valerian in 3.5-year-olds. You just have to make sure your dosing is okay. In addition to which, to check if your pediatrician doesn't know anything about it. Generally, if you're working with any kind of functional medicine doctor, or some people, I don't really recommend self-treating or treating your family without any experience, but there are Some, functional medicine doctors will do some neurotransmitter testing and can look at levels of melatonin. So that can be helpful. Can L-theanine, cortisol, melatonin supplements be habit-forming, affect natural sleep in the long run? L-theanine isn't really habit-forming. Some people, there is some information about, again, not long-term danger of melatonin, but you don't want to become reliant on it. But what I like to do is try to get the sleep normalized. And once the sleep is normalized, then try to wean it off. And for some people, you may have to pulse it. So you may use it for a few weeks and then stop it. If the sleep starts to change, you put it back in again, but then you stop it again. Do you recommend waking up kids early on those days when they sleep late to get them back to the regular sleep? It is recommended. It is good to keep kids on a regular sleep cycle. So I know, as sad as that may be, very often when kids are sleeping till 9, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning or later, they're not going to be able to get to sleep at night after that. So it's important to help get them on that normalized sleep schedule. What's the ideal time to take the herb and other sleep supplements? 1 to 2 hours, again, somewhere from 2 hours to half an hour before bedtime is when you would like to take those, because that's when they're going to start to have their effect. Multiple questions about the slides, wanting the slides to be shared. I'm glad that you appreciate them and you want to take another look at them. Can taking protein in dinner affect sleep due to gassy sensation? Protein is not generally something that induces gas. That often comes from fiber. And again, remember, your protein is going to provide your tryptophan, your GABA and your theanine and your other nutrients that are helpful for sleep. They're really, a high protein diet shouldn't affect your sleep. I was informed rhodiola not before sleep, only early part of the day. Remember, one of the things I said was rhodiola can also help with attention, focus. It can be more activating to some people. So I actually do tend to recommend rhodiola during the day to help with the attention and focus, but it also reduces anxiety, which can ultimately then improve sleep. So yeah, I think rhodiola is one that's probably better taken for most people earlier in the day, but it can impact your sleep positively. I've heard one should cycle melatonin. Yep, we just talked about that. And somebody else just asked if they could get access to the slides. Can you see the presentation in another platform? So more access to the slides. 5-year-old boy, very picky eater, also poor sleeper. How can I improve his diet? And will this hopefully improve his sleep? That is a very big question that I cannot answer in the time we have, nor in this discussion today. But for a very picky eater, obviously I work with people and I'm happy to see you and talk with you about your child directly. There's a really good Instagrammer. Her name, she has an Instagram handle that's called Feeding Picky Eaters. She used to work specifically with just autistic kids, and now she's working with lots of picky eaters. But she has some really good information, and she also, I recommend her highly as a place to get started if you're looking for help with picky eating. But again, I too do, counseling for picky eating. Oh, hi, Jacques. Thank you for saying hello. Our nutritionist recommended GABA to our child, but after a month he is more stressed even during the day, more sleepless at night. That's interesting. I don't normally see that. One of the things I always do is, everybody's unique. Could be something in the GABA, one of the excipients in the GABA, the additional ingredients, or it could be that he just doesn't need more GABA, and that's not the thing that would be good for him. I tend to stop the GABA, see if he gets better, start it again. If it gets worse again, you've pretty much identified that that's the issue. It may be that it's not the GABA at all and it's something else. You can take the GABA out and try it. And then if he's still upregulated, it's probably not the GABA. You recommended a lot of supplements. I'm interested in trying them, but where should I start? Currently don't take any other than a vitamin gummy. Thank you. And somebody said, I'm wondering the same thing. So yeah, it's a lot of information. I try to give lots of information to help you all. I did give you some clues. A child who's constipated probably needs magnesium. A child who has reflux would probably do well with melatonin. Those are some of the clues. If your child has trouble with attention and focus, you may want to look more into something like rhodiola. But I can't guide you specifically as to what would be right for your child without doing an individual consultation. But generally what I think about is all the lifestyle stuff should be a priority. Getting the diet right, that's a priority. And then starting to look at the herbs, the supplements, the adaptogen. And again, thinking about, is this more of a stress response? Then maybe the adaptogenic herbs are better. Is this more of a sleep cycle disruption? That's a different story. So looking at, trying to take a critical look at what's happening with your child will be the best way to do that.